Well, hello, everyone. It's a real joy to have you tune in again on another episode of the Leadership Conversation. So glad you were able to tune in today. Hey, listen, I've got a great guest with me today. It's exciting to have a good friend. His name is Austin Epperson. And Austin and Charity have been pastoring the great metropolis of Jay, Oklahoma. And I'll let him tell you geographically where that's situated. But it's a real joy to have him come on. And Austin, we welcome you, my friend. And we just want to know how you guys are doing through all of this crazy quarantine stuff. And then, as I've been asking all of our guests on the leadership conversation, are you tired of hearing about COVID-19 yet?
Well, first, thank you for having me today. I'm fired up to be here with you. We are in a massive metropolitan area. We have about 1,200 people, I guess, in the town, just a little over that, close to 2,000. But we are situated right between Grove and Uchi Lake, and so it's absolutely beautiful down here where we're at.
Wow.
My house is right off Grand Lake, so I do love it. Even though we're in rural America, it's an awesome place to be for sure. And so we're having fun during the quarantine. My son loves it. You know, he's out of school and he loves being out of school. So he's going to be difficult to get back in to school. And
I bet.
I'm absolutely tired of hearing about COVID-19, just to be brutally honest with you. So
But good
this has been
family
hard
time
on
out of
me.
this. Good family time out of this too, though.
Absolutely, absolutely. We've taken up some new hobbies, trying fishing. You know, we live on all these lakes, and so we were never fishermen, but we're giving it a go. We are doing a lot of fishing, very little catching. Nothing that I want to post on social media, I can tell you that. So we're working on
That's
it though.
awesome.
We're gonna try to get better at it as we go.
Oh, that's terrific, man. So you guys are situated like pretty close to Grand Lake, which is one of our biggest lakes in Oklahoma for all of those who are tuning in today. It's a beautiful place, a lot of good fishing. And so, yeah, the wildlife and outdoors is pretty close to you guys.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. As far as the state of Oklahoma, you'd be hard pressed to find a more picturesque place than Northeast Oklahoma. It's beautiful for sure.
Absolutely. Jay, in particular, is a pretty impoverished community
Mhm.
from what I've heard, but you
Mhm.
guys are knocking it out of the park out there in Jay.
It's really been interesting. Our county is Delaware County, and it's the poorest county in the state of Oklahoma.
Great.
So that has created some interesting challenges for some of the people.
Sure.
But the community itself is incredibly tight knit, and it's been a very interesting place to be in. It instantly became family for us out here. These people welcome you in, and they
Yeah.
make you part of their tribe very quickly, and so that's been a huge blessing for us. And I think that's created a lot of ministry opportunities. You know, one of the things we say at our church all the time is "Welcome to the family." And that has
Good.
fit here culturally because that's what Jay is. Jay is a family for sure. And so, yeah, we love it.
That's beautiful. So you guys have just been pastoring that for a short time, and you were rocking and rolling with some
Mhm.
super momentum, and then all of a sudden, to a screeching halt with this COVID-19 quarantine globally here. But
Mhm.
man, I want you to just speak real candidly because I think you have some really good insight. You're a tremendous young leader. You and Charity have a lot going for you. You're a student of leadership. Man, why don't you just speak to young leaders, your own peers? What would
Mhm.
you offer in suggestions to them during this time and beyond this time?
Yeah. Well, I was thinking about this a little bit, and for us, I don't feel like I can speak with authority to a lot. I mean, we've only been here 10 months. I mean, we got voted in the last week of May, and
Wow.
so we're kind of came in a very interesting time. The very week we were voted in, a tornado came through the north side of town and took out several houses, and so that was week one. So welcome to lead pastoring a church. And now here we are, 10 months later, and we're in the middle of this pandemic that no one knows what's going on, and no one knows where we're going from here. And so,
You talk about the creativity of storms, right?
no joke,
One
it's
extreme
created
to
something really interesting for sure. But I tell you what, I have appreciated in this moment is the power of the local church. I mean, if I've
wow.
learned one thing about The church, it's this, that it really is a family. And when we moved here, like I said a moment ago, this place became our family, and it's been amazing to watch people galvanize together in those tragedies. And so what that has done is, because it brought the church together, it allowed us to really give that full brunt, face to the community, and people have bought into that, and they've wanted to be a part of that. When you see a group of people that are galvanized as family, you want to be a part of that. And so what created the foundation for that to happen is what I've been thinking about a lot. And I really think it was through the transition, both on my side with me and Charity, and also on the church's side. And if I was to give any sort of advice to my peers, going through a transition, I think you really want to think that process through before you step into a church. And so these are just some thoughts that I had, going into it. I asked myself a few questions, and the first is this: does this church, does this board speak the same language I do? Do they hear my voice? When I talk to them and I share vision and I shared my passion and I shared what I felt like God called me to do, did that resonate with them? And you can see that on people's faces. Because if that wasn't clicking with the boardroom, I knew I was going to have a hard sell for the church. And so going through that transition process, we were able to see in a couple different areas where that happened and some where it didn't. I think another really important thing you want to ask yourself in the transition process is, where do we fit? And I think we as pastors have a real hard time being self-aware. Sometimes I don't know if we're always crystal clear on our strengths and our weaknesses. I don't know if we're crystal clear on what God's called us to do, the vision that he's laid on our hearts, what we are really capable of handling in the moment. And so that was something that was real important for Charity and I. We tried to really look at ourselves, strengths, weaknesses, what we felt like God called us to do, our giftings, and then we tried to look at the church and ask the question, do we fit here? I mean, do we contribute to this? Do we have the skill set that this church needs to go to the next level? And then the last question that we asked ourselves was, do we fit culturally? The reality is that when you're stepping into rural America in particular, there is a cultural reality that you need to be able to fit into that, or I think you're going to have a real hard time. And so we grew up in rural Oklahoma. We grew up in the western side of the state. So going into that rural context of Jay was like going back home for us. And so that part of it was real easy. And I think as guys are in this season, particularly in the situation we're in right now with the pandemic, as we're going to new churches, you're already going to have this where this is going to be bringing people together. And I think those questions are going to be even more important because it's galvanizing people. In our case, it helped us. But if you're trying to step in during this or after this without asking those questions, I think it could be a real hard time for you.
Are you answering those questions with effectiveness? You and Charity asking yourselves those questions again and again, because it takes repetitive asking, doesn't it?
Oh,
And
absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, you were talking about what has this virus taught me in this season. If anything, because I am very self-aware, I think I reflect a lot, it has shown me a lot of my weaknesses. One thing I think I've realized in the middle of this virus is that there are certain things that are my strengths. I feel like I'm really good at organizing things, getting events together, people, getting, people mobilized and all of that. We've seen that even in our first year. And now COVID came in and dropped a hand grenade in the middle of all of our plans. And now I'm trying to have to be flexible. And so in a season like this, where you're literally going day to day, it's very difficult to plan. And I'm realizing how I'm not very flexible in the moment. And that's created a real interesting learning moment for me. And I don't have the answers on that. I'm still trying to figure that out.
when you examine yourself and you come into those questions of self-examination in the self-awareness category, man, honesty is critical, isn't it?
Critical, absolutely,
You
absolutely.
can't
And
fool, you can fool a lot of people, but you can't fool yourself for very long.
no, and it's brutal to have to look yourself in the mirror and say, man, you're not very flexible when your plans fall apart, and
Wow.
that's what I've had to do the last few days. And I think in the middle of crisis, you really figure out what, obviously we all say you figure out what you're made of, but you also figure out what's lacking there. And, for me, one of the things, I'm super competitive. And we were playing some board games with some people a while back, and I realized, man, I'm just always competitive in these seasons. Why is that? Why am I so competitive over a board game? And it occurred to me that I like controlling the outcome of things. I don't like micromanaging. I do not want to micromanage people. That doesn't appeal to me at all. But I do like knowing where things end. I'm the guy who reads the ending of the movie before he watches it. I always read the last couple chapters of a book or something before I read the whole thing because I want to know where I'm going. And in a
Sure.
season like this, I don't know where we're going, and I
Yeah.
don't know where we're going to land. We are really at the ebb and flow of something that's way outside of our control, and so trying to figure that out and flow in that in the moment, that's been interesting.
Or you're not alone. There's a lot of things that I like about you, Austin. A couple that come to mind pretty quickly is you and Charity are incredibly teachable,
Hmm.
and then you're also aggressively patient, or maybe I should say it like this: patiently aggressive. You're
Okay.
patiently aggressive. You're going after things, but you know that there's a certain speed you've got to go after it. And sometimes you can't get everything you want accomplished just
Hmm.
overnight. Let me ask you a question again at a point of transparency. But there are
Hmm.
a lot of established churches, a lot of established church leaders out there that want to embrace young leadership. What
Hmm.
would you say to established churches out there about young leaders?
So kind of going back a little bit to that transition period, it's been my observation that I think a lot of churches are trying to walk through that without having an outside voice help guide that conversation. And, for us as church leaders, we live in the church. I mean,
Yeah.
we eat it, we breathe it, we live for it, we love it. And a lot of the people making those decisions, okay, we want a young leader. That's
Mhm.
that's what we know. We know we want a young guy, but that's a very vague term, and that can mean anything. And everybody's definition of that's going to be different. And so I think what's really important for established churches is when you're going through the transition or you're looking for a young leader, you're going to
Yeah.
have to get into the room and you need to start solidifying what does that mean. We want a young guy. And if you have an outside voice helping speak into that, asking the questions, what do we need? What's this season look like for the church? Even asking simple questions, are affairs in order? I mean, is everything right with the books and everything so the transition can go smooth? There's a lot of those questions that need to be asked, and it's not to the fault of the leadership, but
Sure.
they have jobs, they have families, they don't live in it like the pastors do. And so I think having an outside voice to help give some direction on that is going to be fine. My board is considerably older than I am. I'm actually the youngest person in the boardroom and on the staff. And so that's been an interesting realization having gotten here. However, my board is the closest people to me in the church. I mean, we have very close relationships with all of them, and I truly think it's because these guys figured that out. And so age really didn't become an issue for us once we got here. And I think that it would be wise, obviously, to look at young leaders. I'm doing that right now. I'm trying to look around and say, okay, what young people in my church understand social media better than I do? And so I think that's wise. But I don't think you can just start taking people because of their age or looking at. You really need to know what you're looking for, and sometimes I
That's
think
good.
we get skewed on that.
Boy, that's a good takeaway. You need to know what you're looking for,
Hmm.
not just an age
Hmm.
demographic. That's good. That's
And I
really
think that's
good.
where that outside voice helps a lot.
Yeah.
Because sometimes we need people asking us questions. I had a lot of people when I was going through transition asking me questions to help
Sure.
make sure that I really was self-aware. And unfortunately, for a lot of our established churches, they don't have that outside voice, and I
Yeah.
really think it creates a problem, and it makes a tougher road for them.
Yeah. On another episode together, I'll have to ask you how you develop those relationships with outside voices, as well as how you're building relationships practically with those people inside leadership there at
Hmm.
Jay. Man, this has been a good talk. Listen, let's wrap it up by you just giving some inspirational marks on what you see moving forward. We're
Hmm.
in people when they hear this, they will still be
Hmm.
trudging through this real difficult time. So, Let's talk about your hope for JFA and also
Mhm.
for the church at large. What do you hope for on the other side of this crisis?
Absolutely. So I was on a Zoom call the other day, and Ronnie Floyd was talking and answering a lot of questions of different pastors,
Great.
and he said something that just stuck with me. They asked him, "What's your prayer in the middle of this season?" He said, "I'm praying that God flattens the curve." Now, this was a couple of weeks ago when everybody just started shutting down, and he said, "My prayer is that our country sees what God can do." That he
Oh,
said the country has seen the church, and he said, frankly, we're not making the cut. It's time for them to see what God can do. And when he
wow.
said that, I thought, wow, there's a lot of truth to that. You know, a lot of us have plans. We live and die by our plans. We live and die by our ideas and our creativity and our vision and all that. And it's all good. It's all good.
Yeah.
It's all from God. I truly believe that. But in this season, my hope and prayer for my church is that they really do see God, that they learn
Wow.
how to feed themselves on the word and in worship and in those quiet times with the Lord, and that they really do start to value the gospel message and see that when the world starts falling apart, that the gospel still stands and that God, it really is lifted up. And I'm praying that for my church, that we pastor that well. And I'm praying that for the global church, that we point to him during this season and that they see what God can do, because we're not enough. We're not enough.
Man, that's our prayer that
Amen.
he'll lead us through this and be glorified every step of the way. That's good
Amen.
stuff, Austin, man. Thank you for joining us.
Hey,
And
thank you for having me.
thank you, audience, for tuning in to another episode of the Leadership Conversation. More conversations coming your way, but in the meantime, let's grow, create, and invest together.